sign-in sheet, and today we're kind of using our sign-in survey link as a dual purpose sign-in to make sure that we know who's in attendance today, but also is doubling as a survey for your thoughts and input into this traffic impact study. And we'll go over some dialogue and questions today, but this survey will provide you an opportunity to give your feedback. And not only you can relay it today, but if you don't get the opportunity or think of some other items that you didn't raise today, you'll have this survey as well. Just a quick preview of the agenda today. We're not trying to be as formal as a regularly scheduled meeting. We're trying to leave the majority of today's discussion for open dialogue so that we can hear from you all. But we do want to just provide a little bit of a background for the focus of this effort and kind of how it came to be, and some of the background work that has already happened within our region related to traffic impact studies and analysis. And then we'll give a quick overview of what we envision for the RFP process before kind of turning it over to open dialogue for y'all to weigh in on what we've some initial thoughts for this and kind of next steps for carrying this effort forward. So I think we have we still have some folks joining us, but if people wouldn't mind just putting their name and affiliation in the chat box, that would be great. I think we've got good representation of local governments, some elected officials, Tennessee Department of Transportation, TDEC, and even consultants. So I think if you wouldn't mind just plugging that in, so we have that, and then we can move on and continue through the agenda. So as folks are typing in there, I'll just start with kind of an impetus for this regional traffic impact study. Dates back a while. I think if we go back to our last regional transportation plan, the 2040 RTP, there were some recommended actions within that looked to commission a study to review best practices for land development, impact fees for transportation, and even in our last 2045 RTP that we recently adopted in February, one of the key findings from that revealed that our region ranked last in terms of funding per capita against a lot of our peer regions across the country. And so, looking at opportunities for those lower levels of funding being, particularly at the local level, being one of the key contributors to that lower level of funding for transportation improvements, looking to kind of address that issue. And then we've also had interest from multiple counties and local governments, represented on this call too, at looking at better tools and strategies to manage some of the rapid growth and development that you all are experiencing on a daily basis, and the impacts of that on transportation. And so, we've incorporated set aside the funding and identified this as a study within the Unified Planning Work Program. And kind of the next steps is to help better flesh out what that planning activity looks like in the coming months and year. So with that, I'll acknowledge that we're not starting from scratch when it comes to this. There are some previous efforts that have been kind of in the works for multiple decades. One example, the over multiple decades, I think there's been steps to develop more systematic approaches to kind of assessing and managing those transportation impacts from new development. And one example that a lot of you are familiar with is the approach that Williamson County has used since the late 1980s with their use of traffic sheds. And kind of the basic premise behind this is the allowable development within a given traffic shed is directly related to the available capacity of the roadway network for collectors and arterial roads serving that proposed development. And so kind of if the capacity does not exist, then the options are either to scale back that development that's being proposed or to conduct a traffic study to identify those necessary roadway improvements in order to serve that new development. And so this has been in use in Williamson County for multiple decades, and I think it's helped address, obviously they've experienced strong growth pressure, but it's helped balance that rural and urban settings within the county, and also encouraged the concentration of a lot of that new growth within areas where it can be best served with the roadway network and that existing roadway capacity. Another example wanted to highlight is the use of impact fees. And so there's a number of communities that have implemented or enacted impact fees. One that I'll highlight is White House. This was in the mid 90s that they enacted impact fees, and these fees, used to pay paid by each new development, and in White House they're assessed across residential, commercial, and other development types. And that fee is proportional to the impact that the new development will have. They use impact fees for fire protection, parks, as well as the roadway system. And I think one of the intended purposes of it is to ensure the timely construction of some of those capital improvements on roadways that are necessary to serve that new development. I will note, I think, for example, just to get a sense of the fee structure for a new single family unit, it would be about $400 per unit that's assessed as part of that road impact fee. And I mentioned that White House is not the only community that enacted impact fees. There's a number of other communities as well that enacted impact fees and adequate facilities taxes. Largely, this was during the 80s and 90s, and largely within the Williamson County and Rutherford County. I think, Tom, you mentioned a good comment that I was going to touch on next, is that a lot of these actions happened in the 80s and 90s, and then with the passage of the County Powers Relief Act by the General Assembly in 2006 is when a lot of these impact fees and adequate facilities taxes then became prohibited from being enacted by local governments, cities as well as counties, unless they were previously authorized. And so that's kind of restricted some of, I guess the growth or increasing usage of these impact fees over time within our region. So very few new communities, since that law was passed. One other, or I guess two other resources to share. Did anyone want to chime in there? Okay, just two more resources to share. Another one from Williamson County from 2016. This was their comprehensive traffic strategy. And I think this one I wanted to know because they took a fresh and comprehensive look at what's necessary in order to address a lot of the changing traffic patterns not only increasing amount of pass-through traffic that the county was experiencing, but also kind of the changing regional travel patterns. I think one example that comes to mind is the way that I-24 has become increasingly congested over the years, and people have found alternative routes, whether that be going down 65 and over 840 or cutting through Williamson County in order to get home faster. That has kind of complicated or changed the travel patterns and the type of volumes and traffic congestion that some of these communities may be experiencing. It also identified, through this effort, they also identified a funding gap between a number of the project costs and project needs that were identified and the available funding to implement them, and identified kind of a set of strategies to move forward with in order to help manage traffic in the unincorporated area of the county, that kind of relying on traffic sheds, as well as potentially dedicated funding from other sources in order to pay for some of these roadway improvements. And then the last resource that I wanted to share was done in 2016 as part of the NPO Southeast area study. As part of that, we did a impact fee demonstration that identified kind of two growth management tools focused on the use of TOD as an option, as well as impact fees within that Southeast area. So it explored, it's hypothetical, but explored, what the potential fee structure could look like, anticipated revenue that it would generate, some of those transportation investments that it would help fund, and then potential phasing of that work. And so that was, presented some things to consider for future implementation, given that there's a lot of, activity and project needs within that area. And this list of resources definitely not comprehensive. There's more that we could share, but we just wanted to cover a couple of examples today, and then leave additional time for discussion. So, kind of given that work, what we see at least as some initial objectives for this traffic impact study, couple that come to mind are coordinating policy, and so just kind of documenting, summarizing those existing impact fees, rates, and their utilization across our region, highlighting some of the best practices, not only within our region, but if there's any examples to reference across the state. Another area I think where we could provide some good resource and background documentation is kind of on the data side. I think with a lot of the look at traffic impacts really requires a lot of documentation of not only existing growth and development trends, but traffic patterns, traffic volumes, and we could maybe there's some opportunities to not only standardize some of those assumptions, but at least provide kind of a baseline for communities within the region to work off of. And then I guess the third and probably the most important would be equipping you all with kind of the tools to manage future growth and development, whether that be through guidance to manage some of these impacts associated with new development, or better aligning some of the strategies with your community situation, whether that be based on the existing legal barriers or development pressures that you're facing, or available revenue for transportation, or kind of existing tax policies that you have, or fee structures that you already have in place. And then kind of translating that into some potential tasks that we've at least outlined for consideration. Those would involve, obviously convening stakeholders. I think we would benefit from having a diverse group spanning elected officials, staff, involving developers as well as part of this process, and maybe some economic development specialists that can understand and benefit from discussion of some of those needs and potential opportunities. And then another would be, assessing some of those opportunities, identifying what they are, and then which strategies are most applicable based on the local conditions, as we talked about, the legal framework or development pressures. And then obviously we want to solicit public input on this. I think there's going to be differences across the different cities as well as counties within our region, but want to make sure that a lot of these key recommendations that we come up with have public support. And then lastly, just the developing that guidance, making sure that it's useful and applicable to you all, as you are going to be the ones implementing and pursuing a lot of these strategies at the local level where the decision making is made. So just to wrap up here with a couple more slides is, looking through kind of our schedule with the RFP process. We're looking to kind of initiate this conversation today through discussions with you all. We have the survey as well to continue to collect input. And then as we embark on this RFP process, we'd like to convene a committee that would help us flesh out what the scope of work would look like before it's released in the fall, and then reconvene that committee to review the proposals that come in and before the selection of a candidate. And hopefully we can get all that done and get this work started by early 2022. Just some initial considerations for representation on this review committee. Looking to potentially include local governments, transit agencies, state and federal agencies, developers. I think would be an interesting perspective to add, as well as any economic development officials or other candidates that you all think would be worth including. So those are all the slides that we had just to kind of shape the dialogue for today. But now we kind of wanted to turn it over, based on what we've thrown your way, have a couple of questions just to, get some additional insights or thoughts on what we've outlined, and want to hear from you all on a couple of questions here. We can just start from the top and then continue to work our way down. But other things that we should be considering. Any specific questions immediately on the purpose of this effort or on the objectives of what we're trying to achieve? And I can circulate back to the slides so we can refer to what was laid out.
Hey, Sean, this is Doug Demasi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Doug, how you doing?
Good. Yourself? I kind of jumped in a little late to the game, so I heard you mention briefly the County Power Relief Act and all that. Of course, that's something we've been dealing with here in Rutherford County for quite some time. We've been trying to get some of that changed for several years. We had a little bit of progress this year. Looks like we're going to be switching from the development tax we currently have to an adequate facilities tax, which will probably take effect later this year, probably July 1. We'll just have to see how that all plays out. They were talking about it in committee last night. But is there going to be any talk about, I mean, when it boils right down to it, I mean, that's for counties at least, that's pretty much the only option that we're going to have moving forward. Is there going to be any talk, talking about these, equipping local governments with tools to manage growth and all that? Are we going to recommend any kind of like, state law changes or anything like that? I mean, I don't know how far any of that will ever get, but was that something that you were going to, or we or the committee was going to take a look at as part of this study?
Yeah, I think that's definitely on the table. Obviously there's, challenges to doing that, but I think definitely considering that as, there are legal barriers that exist, but what are some potential, strategies to address that? And I think potentially through this, we could get a better understanding of like how widespread the support is for, changes to that legislation. And my understanding right now is that if you were to city or county, you wanted to make changes to state law, you'd have to kind of go it alone as like a private act, and that seems maybe like a harder obstacle to overcome than if there was, Middle Tennessee or the MPO region kind of speaking with one voice, as there's widespread support for this particular change, or like a bill that would apply to multiple local governments.
Okay, great, thanks.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Sean, can you hear me?
Yeah, hey, Tom.
I posted an item on there that I'd like to see as a result on the text that basically focuses on kind of what Williamson County's been able to effectively do over the past 10 to 15 years with their traffic shed analysis. And I should preface that by saying that in light of the cutoff of revenue stream through impact fees and adequate facilities, I really see undertaking a regional traffic shed analysis as a starting point for local traffic shed analysis as a part of this project. That to me ought to be one of our primary goals of this project, so that we've got at least a starting basis. Maybe it's a larger region than we would all prefer at the local level, but at least it gives us a starting point to then go in and drill down and have some sub traffic sheds within the more regional traffic sheds, if you will, to work off of, and then hopefully implement something. Mimicry is a lot of times associated with flattery, and I hope Joe Horn takes it that way, but I've been impressed from what I've heard of what they've been able to extract out of out of development interest for off-site improvements, in particular, like the nearest intersection, things like that. Right now, about the most I can get out of any development largely consists of what they're willing to do right in front of their development. And occasionally, if they've got enough right of way down the road, they might agree to some alternative improvement that widens a section of county road that's too narrow, as long as they can do it in existing right of way without having to buy right of way. So I'm interested in the effectiveness and how Williamson County has used that as sort of a research point, and then possibly implementing that on a regional level.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's good input, Tom. And I don't want to put Joe on the spot, but he might be able to speak to the complexity or challenges in regional traffic patterns impacting their like locally defined traffic sheds.
Oh, I always love to talk at these meetings. Thanks, Tom. I didn't come prepared to rally around the traffic shed this morning, but what I will say is, I think it's a good tool, particularly for county governments. And it's that you're essentially trying to develop a meaningful relationship between zone density and what the capacity is on the existing roads. And, and we were able to, in a number of cases, able to, get off-site, get a series of off-site improvements. The issues you get into, though, is, it's the same issue that you get into with any other, dare I say, zoning matter, which is each property is not the same, each roadway is not the same, each particular issue isn't the same. But the ultimate outcome in the traffic shed is once you work out the calculus, maybe giving it too much credit, the calculus between capacity and the current zoning, it will become over time as traffic increases it'll tighten up. You'll have less capacity because the development you approved on that project or on that road several years before will be taking up some of that capacity. We have I won't say we abandoned the traffic shed. Traffic shed sort of left us a few years ago because of development patterns in the county. We kept finding ourselves in a position where between the several municipalities, it was hard for us to meaningfully make the traffic sheds work as effectively as they should. So if y'all have any questions, I'll attempt to answer it, but I'm not sure if I'm well prepared to give a PowerPoint presentation on it without a PowerPoint prepared. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joe. And I think what I heard you saying too is because the traffic patterns are continuing to change rapidly along with like the growth and development, that kind of that update frequency of the traffic sheds is important in order to kind of make sure that it's current and reflecting what's going on in real time.
Hey, Sean.
I would accept that premise.
Yeah, is that Bill?
Yeah, Bill over in Gallatin. The seems like
You still there, Bill?
yes,
Maybe.
I am. I'm unmuted, but I don't know. I've had some connection. You're fade out occasionally. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. It seems like the idea is that the local governments need to get together and agree on an adopted level of service that they're willing to entertain, and to identify various components of the roadway system, I suppose, is what we're looking at mostly here, of how through the traffic studies that are submitted for certain projects, and some would have to be de minimis as to what would be a contribution either for a particular project to overcome a deficiency created by a new development, or a general impact fee, which would really needs to be tied to an improvement program, a long-term improvement program. So I don't know that any of the other communities, or much less ours, have gone to the details of providing a study that would try to identify, first of all, what would be an accepted level of service. I don't know if any of the communities around here have adopted level of service standards and to their roadway network and or intersections, for example, specific turning movements or anything of that sort. But that seems to be the basis from which you would derive the bait for an impact fee that would be have a proportionate rationality to the impact of the project, as opposed to just assessing somebody for an impact fee without identifying specific projects and evaluating that impact, not simply because of you're building something, but simply because you're exceeding a level of service when you do build something. So I don't know if that's trying to convey this in a clear manner or not, but to create the study or the impact that's relative to the needed capacity, it seems to be the important aspect. We did have a proportionate fair share or pro rata share corridor that we established a couple of years ago along one roadway in Gallatin. So that's one way we were targeting to fund at least some improvements through private investment, that we assess these various property owners along a roadway depending on how much traffic they're generating. So it's going to be an interesting exercise, and it probably will require an interlocal agreement to ensure that something that's happening across a boundary of one community is shared with the other communities.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I can speak to that maybe a little bit. This is Kevin Rigsby in Smyrna. We do have impact fees, and they were done through a private act. When our charter was adopted back in 1999, we were, as part of the charter, we had the ability to adopt an impact fee. And so that's how we have them. I can say that as part of the original study, and it's every 5 years or so, we update our numbers through a private consultant, and we do base that on the existing level of service. And so whatever we don't, and that's as a system-wide level of service as far as the arterials and collectors, so that we're not charging new development to correct problems they didn't create. So I do know that at least at that level we have. I don't know that we have adopted any kind of level of service standard or anything like that, but we definitely have. We take level of service into consideration when we assess, whatever the rates are going to be for our traffic impact fees.
And Kevin, for your example, when you refresh every 5 years, are you increasing, I guess, have you increased the rates, or have they stayed relatively constant?
They have increased because a lot of the costs are based on, or the fees are based on what our costs are for road improvements. And so, the impact fee for roads is based on the amount of traffic that is generated by a particular type of development, per house or per 1,000 square feet of retail space or whatever. And so if our costs have increased over a 5-year period, then which almost always happens, then the fees are going to increase proportionally as well.
Hey, Sean, this is Tom Brashear again. I have a question for the county planners out there, and I'll even let Joe sit this one out since I put him on the spot. But in terms of we haven't adopted adequate facilities tax, which is roughly equivalent and means the same thing as an impact fee for our discussion. It is eligible, given the age of when the act was established, it's eligible to be used on any type of capital improvement per our private act. It could be for schools. It could be used for new capital buildings, fire stations, jails, etc. It can also be used for capital improvements such as road improvements. However, in practice, that adequate facilities tax is largely eaten by either the education system or the county jails and fire department, at least in my experience. And there's not been any use of it, to my knowledge, on supplementing or supporting a road improvement program for the county. I texted a minute ago that basically our road commission's primary function anyways seems to be ensuring that the existing highway or road network is paved on a regular basis, and any new roads that come in with subdivision development are built to whatever standard they've adopted in their road commission standards. they've not really, at least in my experience in Wilson County, delved into having an active role in monitoring the impact of development on the existing road network beyond one primary thing they've done. Rather than they don't want to waste their time reviewing the traffic studies we require at the Planning Commission. So what they've done is adopted a minimum standard. Above a certain amount of lots on a subdivision, you've got to put in a center turn lane and a decel lane. And that has actually, even though it's a little arbitrary, has been, and probably legally challengeable. To date, we've not been challenged, and it has helped to allow traffic to continue flowing past new subdivision entrances. But I think anything we do, we've got to find a way to inspire the road commissions, at least on the county's behalf, to be more involved with the planning process, possibly with a traffic shed study, and them embracing that idea, or a level of service, as Bill put it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point up, Tom, because I forgot to mention that even a lot of the counties that have the impact fees in place, a lot of that funding is being dedicated to other priorities, predominantly schools, as you mentioned. New schools, construction of new schools, I think, in particular.
I was kind of curious, Kevin, you'd mentioned that you're basing your impact fee based on the existing level of service. I guess that you're talking about how the roadway at the time that the study was done, whatever the existing level of service had to be, does that mean it has to be maintained as to what it was when it was first established? So if you have level service B on a certain roadway, that's essentially the same level of service you're trying to maintain throughout development of the community?
Sorry, I had muted myself. No, it's based on what it's done is basically done to, again, we don't want to charge the new development to correct, if there's congestion already there, we don't charge the new development to correct congestion that they didn't create.
Right.
So that's really what it is. And it's not a specific roadway level of service. It's really kind of, we assess all the arterials and collectors get assessed and looked at from the standpoint of a system-wide, town-wide level of service, not counting any of the minor streets, because under our system, we only use impact fees to build or widen or otherwise improve collector level streets and above. And so it's just a system-wide level of service. It's not that if we have a level of service B and we want to keep level of service B, it's really just a matter of the actual fee calculation itself. And then, so if it gets to level service D or F and we need to improve it, we can use those impact fees to do those improvements. And we'd also, and you're correct, it does need to be tied to a program. And essentially what we have done is we collect town-wide. Some cities and some communities with impact fees do have different districts. And so an impact fee collected on one side of town has to be spent on that side of town. Under our ordinance, our community is still small enough that we are able to kind of keep it as one large. We collect town-wide and we spend town-wide, basically. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I think your example of the districts exists in Franklin, where there might be four different districts for where the funding is collected and where it's spent in. Well, I guess moving down the list of questions, I know we've talked about a lot, but is there any suggested best practices that we should be considering or evaluating as part of this effort that we haven't mentioned, but we want to raise?
Well, through my experience, I was in Florida when they implemented their concurrency provisions, and concurrency applied to all infrastructure and not just traffic, but they clearly came to the conclusion that a one-size-fits-all concurrency provision is really counterproductive to the overall goals of the community to develop a more compact development pattern and to preserve historic areas and things of that sort. So you're going to have to be kind of creative and create exemptions as to ensure that whatever you do, whatever process you do, is not promoting not only unreasonable standard that will be extremely expensive, but also preserve just to accommodate some development. So that's going to be really an interesting exercise to see how we can balance that to ensure. I've always thought that the best way to deal with this is to primarily address traffic operations, like at intersections and signal systems and things like that, that buy as much capacity as we can from our existing infrastructure, as opposed to implementing some kind of program to create 5 4-lane roadways all over the place. So this is going to be interesting. The concurrency provisions in Florida were practiced for a few years, and then they kept tinkering with them to address some of those concerns. And they quickly realized, though, that it was encouraging sprawl as opposed to discouraging it. So that needs to be kind of thought about.
On that topic, Bill, maybe just a question for Kevin or another community that has impact fees in place. Are you typically reserving those funds for local transportation projects or projects, using it as like a local match for some of the TIP funded projects or projects in the TIP?
Right now, the fair share or the pro rata agreement applies to a particular corridor. So those funds that are collected from development occurring along that corridor are specifically targeted to improvements that were identified in a study done that indicated, based on the adjacent or projected development that would be generating trips to and from the corridor. So there's a lot of assumptions made. Of course, a rezoning will change that, but it didn't cover the full complete cost of that. But it is specific to that corridor, so people are assured, unlike an impact fee, that the money that they are contributing is going to fix the roads or make improvements in their neighborhood, if you will, as opposed to being spent across town. So we had a few questions about it when it came up for adoption and some detailed stuff, but we were able to address those, and we're continuing to get development along that corridor. The problem is we're not going to get enough money from development along that corridor to pay for all of the improvements. So the local government is going to have to end up paying for some of it, and perhaps we'd like to keep it, I guess, local as much as we can, but I'm not sure if that's going to be possible. So it could be that we use some of those funds in addition to local funds to provide a match for some federalized project, if you will.
I can say in Smyrna, we've done both. We have used it as part of a, like a 20% match, and we've used it to do just purely local projects that are
Nick, are you here?
So we've done both.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Just reading Tom's comment here. Sprawl's coming right now, whether we try to curtail it or not. It'd be nice to have a means of either governing development size or extract improvements in return for density maximization under whatever zoning entitlement exists. Yeah, I think I don't have any specific responses for that, Tom, but I think another thing that a lot of this discussion of the traffic impact studies, looking at the traffic impacts is given the rapid pace of growth and development, and it seems like it's continuing at a rapid pace, and so even when we identified the need for moving forward on something like this years ago, it's probably even more timely than it's ever been in order to get in front and as these new developments come through, identify the potential opportunities to leverage the some contributions to pay for some of these improvements that are necessary to support them, given that window on some of the impact fee strategies are kind of, if you miss it, then it's gone. So any other best practices either within the region, within the state? Okay, what about when it comes to outreach, who to involve in this effort? I guess the who, and then the how, potentially how to engage them and the timing of that. I know we identified elected officials, staff, developers, economic development specialists. Is there other groups that we should be capturing?
Well, this is Bill McCord over in Gallatin. I think it's certainly important to ensure that representatives from local governments that have some type of program operating now are part of this effort.
Are you recommending Joe?
Sure. Joe, Kevin, Tom, people from Williamson County.
No, I agree. That's a good idea.
Yeah, this is Kevin. I was going to say that I'm more than willing to be a part of this effort at whatever level you need me to be a part of it. Just because I have been administering impact fees for over, well, we've had them all about 21 years now, and I've been here the entire time. So
It may be interesting to see who, depending on who you select, who's going to always ask for an exception or an exemption from having to participate, what special criteria they might identify as exempt from it. So
I think, Tom, you submitted that idea about the road commission staff. I think that's another one that, traditionally is not represented in our efforts. And so, are there, I think they could be one where there's decision-making that would, relate directly to this effort. Are there any other decision-making bodies similar to the road commission that we should be targeting? Well, if there's other thoughts too on who we should be engaging, we have the survey as an opportunity to provide that feedback as well. Next question would be, what other local, similar to the best practices, but a little bit different is, what local or statewide efforts should we be reviewing as part of this effort as well? And I think this could involve a number of different topic areas. I think one would be, if there's any other push on the legislative front for changes to the County Powers Relief Act. Is there any other efforts going on? I think TDOT may have maybe doing some updating on their a manual for access management. I don't know if there's any additional information that they can provide on that, but I think that was an effort underway that could be related to this effort. Let me know if others have thoughts. Two others that I'll mention, I think, is I think Nolensville. Kevin, you had mentioned that you guys had updated your impact fee through a study with a consultant. I think the town of Nolensville went through a similar effort a couple of years ago, and I think Mount Juliet is also looking to undertake a similar effort in the coming year. But if folks know of any others, feel free to share those now or through the survey. Any other questions that we haven't addressed that you're thinking of now, or you think that we should be thinking about as we move forward?
That's Bill again over in Gallatin. I was kind of curious as to maybe how some of the other communities use their impact fees or whatever funds to uh, achieve an improvement that's not funded in the long range plan or in the STIP or something like that? Or are they focusing just using those funds to target projects that, do not fall into funding from some other source? And because I guess the funds, whatever project comes out of this, could be used to supplement an existing project that's going to be funded by primarily by others, or they could reserve those funds just to do their own local projects and allow the other entity like the state to focus on other problems or other areas. I don't know if that's probably
that's
something beyond today.
That's a good question, Bill. I think Kevin noted that they've done both, taken the approach to use it as the match on projects in the TIP, as well as to use it on advancing local projects with just local funds. Is there any other that are on the line that have examples on the approach that they've taken? I think related to Tom's comment is, makes me think through this effort to, given that it's regional in scope, are there some opportunities or benefits from coming up with, more consistency or standard assumptions to help you all kind of defend some of the recommendations that you're making at the local level? I think this conversation might come up when, you're talking about the property tax rate and how it compares to, peer cities, or the sales tax rate as it compares to some of the peer counties. Does that seem like something that would be beneficial through this effort as well? I think it may have been in the Nolensville impact fee study. Just for context, I think they compared a lot of their rates and fee structure to some of the nearby cities within Rutherford County, as well as Williamson County. I guess one other question for folks, if you want to chime in, would be the on the traffic impact studies that are done within your communities. Is that typically done by a consultant that the developer pays? or is there kind of a strong, methodology that they have to follow that the city is providing?
I can say what we do, based on the number of trips that are anticipated. We have 3 levels of traffic studies that we ask the developer to pay our consultant to evaluate. The consultant creates a scope, gives it to the developer, and the developer brings it in. So they're at least funding the traffic studies.
Great, thanks, Joe. I guess in terms of the staff side in evaluating those, is there any gaps or resources that you feel like you don't have or would like supplemented? And I guess specific would be like, do you feel like you need a traffic engineer to support that effort or something similar?
There probably should be some sort of de minimis review. I don't know if it necessarily was for impact fees, but for some other type of program where, single family home on an old parcel of land would be exempt and or considered de minimis. We too also we have 3 levels of traffic impact studies, and depending on the trip generation of the proposed development, and it's pretty generous. So until you start generating 1,000 daily trips, you essentially don't have to have one, which is pretty high threshold, because 1,000 trips per day for a lot of projects, or less than 1,000 trips per day for a lot of projects, really adds up. Most of our projects will involve less than 1,000 trips per day, but there probably needs to be identified some kind of consistent limit on what would require a traffic study and what doesn't. We require traffic studies, and they'd be prepared by a traffic engineer and at the developer's expense. And then our engineering department reviews those and assesses the impacts to various facilities around town based on that traffic study, and in many cases, the result of other traffic studies affecting the same network. So probably going to redo this. It's not capturing a lot of development in the community.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bill. Well, is there any other comments, contributions, feedback that you want to relay?
Hey, sorry, I was having some technical difficulties there. Yeah, kind of what Bill was talking about on our traffic impact studies. I took a look at our minimum thresholds that we have: 250 trips per day or 50 peak hour trips, whichever is greater, is our minimum requirements that we have for our traffic studies. And I think to the question talking about staffing required to evaluate that, yes. These are, the way we have it structured, much the same as everywhere else. The developers do commission that study, and so I'm sure everybody runs across this, where you get the old jokingly comment that no significant adverse effects noted, no improvements necessary, kind of thing. And so we as staff have to go through and evaluate that, review that. And different cities probably have different capabilities. I used to write traffic studies myself, so I can go in and give a lot of critique to it. But I know that a lot of cities may not have that ability or the expertise in that, to where you can find errors as easily. And so, I think that's probably going to be pretty inconsistent. But yeah, to a traffic engineer or some transportation professional, they could go in and analyze it. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but to analyze it and and to try to find maybe deficiencies, errors, things like that. Sometimes you can go with the recommendations that they have. Sometimes the recommendations they have, I don't agree with. So, but there's a lot of staff time involved with that. Sometimes more than others, depending on the project.
Thanks for that, Andy. And, given your high level of involvement, is there pieces of data that you would like to have that you currently don't have access to? Whether it be, like traffic volumes or congestion, like queues at intersections, things like that.
We have a pretty good method for scoping the studies out as far as area impacts based on the volumes. Depends on how far out you have to go. So if you've got a development that's adding 5 to 10,000 ADT, then you're in a situation where they're going to have to be looking upwards of a half a mile or more on signals or control intersections, as we call them. I think probably one of the bigger things that we run into, and some of the questions you might run into, it goes back a little bit. You talk about the overall roadway capacity, maybe traffic shed, which is really a function of overall roadway capacity. And I think one of the things that is difficult to quantify sometimes in a development approval as you're going through that approval process, the outcry from the community is always traffic, traffic, traffic. And you're adding traffic to my road. How much more traffic can this road handle? Well, there is a theoretical number to it. But sometimes that goes well beyond the scope of the traffic study itself. Traffic studies are usually just looking at intersection points, pressure points. They may not be looking at overall capacity. That's not one of those things that we have traditionally required, but that is something that's worthwhile in some cases.
Appreciate that. Were there any other comments that folks wanted to relay?
I'll speak up again. I know a problem that we have here over in Gallatin is that we do not require the traffic study to be submitted until a final master development plan is presented. And of course, by that time, the preliminary master plan with the zoning change most likely associated with it has already been approved and created vesting for the developer. So you need to think about requiring some level of your traffic impact study to apply maybe not only to smaller projects, but also at the preliminary master plan zoning stage, because you may not want to, unless of course they agree to make some offsite improvements, to consider that rezoning depending on the impacts that it's going to have to the network. And once you get to after your PMDP is approved or your master plan is approved with the zoning, you've already vested that person, so you can't really, come back and reassess that. So it's probably better to think about doing that, and then you could always update the study if the final plan or an amendment to the plan reduces the impact or increases it. That's a flaw in our system right now.
Yeah, I think these are giving some good ideas for looking into kind of process across the region and minimum thresholds, timing, and those sorts of things. Well, this has been some good input. I appreciate you all attending today and being willing to participate and provide some inputs into this process. I think for next steps, we're going to continue to keep this survey open. So encourage you all to complete that survey, and then we'll also circulate to the other TCC, TPB members for their input to help inform the next steps moving forward. But I think this has definitely provided some good additional thoughts that we should be taking into consideration as we continue to carry out this work and embark on the RFP process. We'll send around the recording as well as the slides, and then probably a reminder for this survey as well to both the listservs. But if there's no other comments, I think we'll let you all continue on with your day. But thank you again for taking the time to brainstorm with us today and help scope this out.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks, everybody.
Everybody have a good day.